In its latest report, the aid agency spoke to displaced families who gave horrifying details of their children and loved ones being killed. It has described the attacks as cruel beyond words and called for global solidarity in support of the traumatized society. Save the Children, which advocates for children's rights, has been present in Mozambique since 1986 and has delivered emergency aid to over 50,000 children affected by conflict and natural disasters. Cabo Delgado province has been in the grips of a conflict since 2017. Militants linked to the Islamic State group have been carrying out extrajudicial executions and abduction as they try to caliphate the region. Cabo Delgado is still reeling from consecutive climate shocks, including 2019 Cyclone Kenneth, the strongest cyclone to hit the northern part of Mozambique, and massive floods in early 2020. Meanwhile, the United States has assigned special operation forces to train troops in an effort to combat the spread of terrorism and violent extremism in Mozambique.
Well, we're now joined by the Save the Children Mozambique Country Director, Briggs, to tell us a little bit more about this disturbing story. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We read some statistics at the beginning there. 2,500 people killed since 2017, 700,000 displaced. This is a very sad story that's playing out there and getting more gruesome, it seems, when we talk about the children.
Indeed. This conflict has been getting worse and worse. It's been expanding in geographic territory. And we don't yet see an end in sight. And it's quite disturbing. As you said, 700,000 people, which is about 1/3 of the province of Cabo Delgado, have fled their homes for safer locations, and they have very few options. They don't have livelihoods, they don't have a way to make ends meet, and they're entirely dependent on humanitarian donations, and of course, we don't have enough resources to help everybody.
And this latest news about what's happening to children as young as 11, what is happening? I mean, I just can't imagine how children at that age can be beheaded.
All wars are brutal and all wars harm children. But this conflict seems particularly brutal, and we don't understand either. The insurgents tend to go into villages, burn everything in sight, chase people away, and often use violence. Sometimes they line up numerous people and just kill them. Sometimes they just let people go. It's very hard to understand exactly what's happening there and why. But certainly, children are vulnerable, and children are sometimes left behind as families try to flee in the middle of the night when attackers come. And in some cases, we believe that children have resisted recruitment into these non-state armed groups, and for that, they've also paid a heavy price.
All right, so nobody is safe, essentially, is what you're saying. Tell us about the humanitarian consequences. What are you seeing on the ground?
Sure. Well, 600,000 people are displaced in 3 different ways. Some of them are actually staying with host families. We have extended families where there are up to 50 people in a compound trying to eke by. There are some who are in informal settlements, which are temporary until they find another solution. And then the government has set up 2 different types of camps. One sort of a temporary, not refugee camp, but a displacement camp for those who are temporarily going to be housed there. And then there are permanent resettlement centers for those who choose not to go home, but to try to find a new path and a new life. In all of these situations, it's difficult. We don't have enough food. We don't have enough potable water. There aren't enough latrines. There aren't enough classrooms for children to go to school. There just isn't enough of everything. And there's tremendous, tremendous need.
Let's talk a little about the health consequences, because in these kinds of environments, all sorts of issues that start to play out.
Yes, definitely. Well, Cabo Delgado province has cholera outbreaks almost every year, and so this year has been no different. There have been cholera outbreaks inside the zones of resettlement and cholera outbreaks outside of those zones, but we believe that's now under control. It's not very healthy to live close to one another in temporary and squalid circumstances. But I will say that the government and the AIDS groups are doing their best to try and make it healthy. One of our biggest challenges, of course, is sanitation, which I mentioned. If people don't have access to latrines and good sanitation, if they don't have good site hygiene and clean water and soap, that's just the basic grounds for people to get different waterborne diseases.
I would imagine witnessing some of these brutal attacks and killings, particularly for children who've survived, there must be a psychological aspect that's desperately needing to be addressed.
Absolutely. Save the Children and our partners work closely with children and their families to try to address those children who have psychosocial traumatic issues that need addressing. And we have child protection committees as well as the government social services those children are referred to so that they can seek, so they can receive help. In addition, I want to note that sometimes children are separated from their families. You can imagine running away from your house in the middle of the night into the woods, very easy to get lost. And in many cases, children have been separated, walked alone through the forest for days, only to find the nearest road and get a ride to somewhere, to safety. Recently, we worked with a young boy named Sergio. He's 11, that's not his real name. And Sergio was 2 months in the house of a community leader in a town very far from his village. He had fled, been separated from his family. But he was able to tell us things about his mother and his neighbors. And eventually, through a painstaking process, we were able to locate his mother's neighbor through a cell phone. And through that, his mother, who was several hours away. And after 3 months, we were able to reunite the family. And imagine Sergio's joy getting back together with his 6 brothers and sisters and his mother and his father, who had thought he might be dead. So this is the work that we do, and this is the important work, and we have to have hope. But I want to point out that every war is a war against children, and this war now, as we can see today, is brutally targeting children. And Save the Children will not stand for this tragedy. We're calling on the world to say that this is unconscionable, and we must stop this war on children.
And apart from just dealing with the brutality, there's lost time, lost years as they don't go to school.
Absolutely. Well, the schools in Mozambique have been closed for a year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but there has been some virtual schooling. But almost no displaced children from these zones have been able to benefit from schooling, in part because there simply aren't enough classrooms. So Save the Children and our partners, as well as UN agencies, are trying to build more classrooms and train more teachers so that as the school year opens next week, those children will have the opportunity to go to school and exercise their basic rights to an education.
And will that include those children that are stuck in these temporary shelters, these camps?
Absolutely. As much as possible, we seek to provide schooling solutions for children, whether they're temporary schools or whether they're nearby schools to these camps. We absolutely hope that every child can get back to school and exercise that right, because otherwise we're risking an entire lost generation from this situation.
This doesn't seem to be getting better. What are the authorities telling you as aid organizations in terms of what they're trying to do to stop this militancy?
What we read in the press is that the government has mounted a counterinsurgency campaign, and that's what we know. Certainly, there are many drivers to this conflict, and we believe that peace should be possible. The Mozambican government has many times negotiated with its opponents and celebrated peace deals, and we would like to believe that there can be a peaceful solution to this conflict as well, so that the children can go home and return to their normal lives.
Are you finding, as this militancy escalates, that the areas affected are also increasing, that it's becoming a wider and wider problem?
Initially, this violence started in one district, and it expanded district by district, and now it has encompassed parts of 9 districts. It seems to have stopped there, and we're very hopeful that it will not expand any further. This represents about 20% of the territory of the province, so still most of the province is considered safe, and life can go on mostly as normal, and we're very hopeful that it will not expand any further.
And at this stage, no indication that this might become a cross-border issue?
It's very difficult to say. We certainly hope not, and we don't see any indication.
So what assistance do you need to be able to do your work?
Well, the government has allowed us to do our work, and we have full and free access to the displaced people. The main consideration and the main constraint is funding. There simply isn't enough funding to pay for all the humanitarian needs that children and their families face. There simply isn't enough funding to address the basic day-to-day needs such as food and shelter, as well as the other needs such as education and protection and livelihoods for those who choose to remain in the communities of displacement. They need seeds, they need tools, they need a way to get themselves back on their feet.
You talk about food there. I mean, you know, once children don't get the nutrition that they need, it becomes a whole other ball game as well. Malnutrition and its concomitant consequences. Have you started to see any of those kinds of things?
Malnutrition is a huge problem in the entire country, with about 44% of children who are stunted. But and Cabo Delgado historically has even higher malnutrition rates than the rest of the country. However, we have not seen any specific signs of acute malnutrition that we can directly attribute to this conflict. But of course, we're always on the lookout, because that's an important thing to jump on before it's too late.
And I would imagine that families that are taking care of relatives are overwhelmed themselves, probably have twice, 3 times the number of people in their house than normal.
Sure. Well, Mozambicans are very hospitable, and if your relative knocks, you open the door, and people will share the little that they have in solidarity. It's a wonderful thing about this country, but surely it is overwhelming. Because of the COVID pandemic, we now have 63.7% of Mozambicans are living below the poverty line in a very, very poor country. So there just isn't much to go around. There just isn't much to share when neighbors and family members from all over come into your compound. But I'll give them credit. They work hard. They've not become violent over the situation, but they're working hard to make ends meet and to do their best in very, very trying circumstances.
So what's your urgent message then to perhaps regional authorities and the international community at large?
We need 2 things. We need funding now for the urgent humanitarian needs faced by these 700,000 people, and we need peace. We need a movement towards peace. It may take months, it may take years, but it needs to be started. We need to resume to peace, to settle the conflict, and to allow this country to move forward into the future with pride, with one country, with everybody working together.